Welcome, welcome. And before I forget, Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Asher Kitshanu B'mitzvotav V'tzivanu La'asok B'divrei Torah.
Amen.
And we're going to go into the share. And hopefully you'll see it in a moment. And just to let you know that it's in this little part here, Moses was told before that he was not going to be able to enter the promised land. And basically, he asked God to select someone who will be a fine leader, etc. And God is telling him, you'll see, to take Joshua. And it was quite relevant in a way with Rashi's comments as to the nature of a leader who cares very, very much about what happens when after they are no longer leaders, and that they're just as concerned as while they are. So anyway, let's keep going here. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe. So Hashem says to Moses, Kach lecha et Yehoshua, take for yourself, or take unto you, Joshua bin Nun, the son of Nun, Ish, a man asher ruach bo, who has a man of spirit, right? And maybe we're talking about divinely inspired, etc. We'll see. V'samachta et yadcha alav, and place your hand upon him. And in other words, ordain them. It's an act of ordination, but also the symbolic of transmission of power. Hands, arms basically represent power. So, kach lecha. Kachenu bidvarim. We've had this idea before as to what do we mean by taking? Does it actually mean physically taking? And it is not. We understand this as meaning with words, right? Ashrecha, you are fortunate. Shezachita linhog banav shel makom, to lead the children of the Almighty, of the omnipresent. Lecha. So what's this lecha, to you, doing in this sense? It could have just been kach et Yehoshua, but kach lecha. Et shebaduk lecha. So he says, lecha means what you have examined, what you know about him, what you have checked. Livdok means to check out, right? To examine. Et ze ata makir. That this, so it's ze ata makir means, ze means this, right? This that you recognize. So exactly what Rashi is trying to say here isn't entirely clear to me, but I would say what he's saying is, for you, meaning because you know these elements of him. In other words, you have worked with him, you know who he really is, and on the basis of that, you should convince him to take over the leadership of the people. Asher ruach bo, who has spirit within him. Ka'asher, so this is going back. Ka'asher sha'alta sheyuchal lahaloch keneged ruchor shekol echad ve'echad. So this is actually a very beautiful and interesting interpretation. We had this yesterday. And Ka'asher sha'alta, just as you asked, God is saying to Moses, just as you asked, sheyuchal lahaloch, that he's capable of functioning in regard to each and every person's ruach, their spirit, in other words, their personality. So we saw yesterday that the ability of a leader to be able to work along with the immense variety of personality and intelligence, etc., with the people he leads is terribly important, and being able to manage that well. And that's what we're talking about here. So a man of spirit means a man capable of understanding spirits, is, I guess, the way we might want to translate it. V'samachta et yadcha alav, and place your hand upon him. Ten lo miturgaman. So it's interesting that Rashi doesn't translate it in the way that I did on the Pshat. They understand this as meaning to give him an interpreter. A miturgaman is someone who interprets, sheyidrosh b'chayecha. So in other words, that while Moses is still alive, he should appoint a Meturgaman for Joshua who can be a spokesman, right, for him. Shelo yomru alav, that so people should not say regarding him, meaning regarding Joshua, lo haya lo laharim rosh bimei Moshe, that he was not capable of, I'm put aggrandizing during the days of Moses, but aggrandize is sort of a negative has negative connotations, and I don't believe it means this here, but it means, in a sense, to take on authority. That's, in a sense, is what that means. Literally, it means to lift up his head. In other words, that Joshua, while Moses was still alive, had to be this meek person. But the fact that he was going to receive this maturgaman, right, meant that he was able to have a higher status and a higher stature, even in Moses's life, which again, if you think about it, would help the transition. So, next sentence. V'ha'amadata oto lifnei Elazar hakohen, and you shall set him up, you shall place him before Elazar the priest. Remember, Aaron has passed on already. V'lifnei kol ha'edah, and before the entire community. We'll see what community means in this context. V'tzivita oto la'enehem, and you shall command him in their presence, right there in front of them. They're going to see you're appointing him as your successor. Vitzivitem oto, vitzivita oto, and command him al Yisrael. So the command here has to do with regarding the Jewish people. This is what he has to tell him. Da shetarchanin, you need to know and understand that they are troublesome, haim. Sarvanim, haim. They're also stubborn. Know what you're going to be dealing with, right? It's not going to be a cakewalk, that's for sure. So when you command him and appoint him, warn him ahead of time. Almanat shetikabel alecha, so that he will in fact accept it. In other words, you're saying this to Joshua so that he understands the conditions and he accepts those conditions publicly. Onwards here. V'natata mehotcha alav, and you shall place some of your hood, some of your glory, in other words, or your I'm trying to think of another word for this, but it has to do with the sort of the very position of leadership and the glory that goes along with that, right? Lema'an yishma'u, so that they pay attention to him, they give him authority. Kol ha'adat b'nei Israel, the entire community of the children of Israel. So let's take a look. Sorry, I'm just trying to get this to be in a decent size for you. Okay, here we go. And you shall place your hood upon him. So Rashi explains, what do we mean by this? Ze kirun or panim. This has to do with the rays of light that were shining on Moses' face. That there was something about Moses that was really distinguished and awesome and powerful, etc. And you should transfer this to Joshua. Me hodcha, so it's not hodcha, but me hodcha, and the ma is the partitive article. So me hodcha, velo kol hadcha. So some of your hod, but not all of your hod. Okay. Namtsinu lemedim. So from this we can infer, Pnei Moshe kachama, the face of Moses was like the sun, Pnei Yehoshua kalvana, whereas the face of Joshua was like the moon. It shone, Moses' face shone like the sun, Joshua's face shone like the moon. Lema'an yishmu kol adat Bnei Israel, so that the entire community of the children of Israel should give him authority. They should pay attention to him. Sheyu nohagin bo kavod, that is, they should treat him with respect, v'yirah, and awe, kederech shenohagin bach, just as they treat you. You should make sure they treat Joshua with that level of authority. V'lifnei Elazar HaKohen Ya'amod, and he should stand before Elazar the priest, v'sha'al o b'mishpat ha'orim, and he should inquire of him using the mishpat, of course, means laws, but it means, according to the interpretation here of the Urim and the Tumim, the oracle, right? So it just says the mishpat ha'urim. He should, when he inquires, he should see what the Urim determine before God, lifnei Hashem, al piv yetzu, according to, by his mouth they shall go out. Again, this is referring to Joshua, al piv yavo, and according to his instruction, his mouth, literally, they will enter, they will come in. Hu v'chol b'nei Israel, he and all the children of Israel, itol with him, v'chol ha'edah, and the entire community. So we should understand that the word Eidah here actually refers to the Sanhedrin. That's what that refers to, as opposed to Kol B'nai Yisrael. Okay, let's take a look here. V'lifnei Elazar HaKohen Ya'amod, and he shall stand before Elazar the priest. Hare she'elacha she'alta. Behold, indeed, the request that you made. She'ein hakavod hazeh zaz, that this particular honor does not get removed. So Sfarim Machirim, other manuscripts have the word nutal, should be taken away, mi beit avicha, from your father's house, from your ancestral home. So we're talking about the Urim and the Tumim and the fact that Joshua was going to have to consult with the Levites. And that's the idea, I believe. She'af Yehoshua yehei tzarich le'elazar, that even Joshua is going to require Elazar's assistance. V'sha'alo, and he should inquire of him. We have to do, this has to do with the decision to engage in warfare. So he would have to consult with Elazar and the Urim to find out if he should go. And we have examples later in the Bible where they do this sort of thing. Al piv, according to his word, his mouth, shall Elazar. So that's interesting. I thought it was referring to Joshua, but the interpretation here, because it's ambiguous, Rashi is of the opinion, or at least is based on the research he's done, that the piv here refers to Elazar, that Elazar is going to tell Joshua whether or not they should engage in battle, and that's going to be the decisive. V'chol ha'edah, and here Rashi says it quite explicitly, Sanhedrin. It's the Sanhedrin. Okay. Vayas Moshe, Moses did, kasher tziva Hashem oto, just as God had commanded him. Vayikach et Yehoshua, and he took Joshua, and of course we understand he spoke to Joshua, convinced him to take the job, right? Vayamidehu lifnei Elazar HaKohen, and he placed him before Elazar the priest, v'lifnei kol ha'edah, and before the entire community. Understand Sanhedrin, right? So, vayismoch, let's see, that is, okay, that's the end of the sentence, right? So let's take a look here. Vayikach et Yehoshua. So again, he took Joshua, lakcho bidvarim. He took him with words. This is the sifrei, that halachic midrash on the book of Numbers and Deuteronomy, right? V'hodio matan schar parnasei Yisrael, and he informed Joshua regarding the reward of those leaders of Israel, la'olam haba, in the next world. In other words, after he died. So he's saying, there's a lot of aggravation and trouble with doing what you're doing, but at the same time, you should know that your divine reward is very, very great. Vayismoch et yadav alav v'yitzavehu, and he placed his hands upon him, and he commanded him, kasher diber Hashem, just as the Lord had commanded, b'yad Moshe, through Moses. Interesting little statement there. But, so on the one hand, you've got the sort of direct statement being made here, and then it's as if it takes a step back and says that's what God had told Moses. Vayismoch et yadav. So here's the point. When God tells Moses to do it, he uses the singular for hand, right? Let's make sure I've got the place here, just so that you can see that. Right. There, yadcha. Yadcha is singular, right? But when Moses actually came to do it, he had what Rashi's telling us is that he had a generous spirit, that Moses had a generous spirit, because it says he placed his hands, both of them, upon him, and he commanded him. So, vayismoch et yadav, and he placed his hands, be'ein yafeh, with a generous spirit, with generosity. Yoter v'yoter, more and more mimashin nitztaveh, more and more than he had actually been commanded. He did it generously. She'akadosh Baruch Hu amar lo, because the Holy One, blessed be He, had said to him, "V'samachta et yadcha," that you should place your hand. V'hu asa b'shtei yadav, but Moses actually did it with both his hands. V'asu kechli maleh v'gadush, and he made him, I believe this is making Joshua, like a vessel that was filled and overflowing. Umal'o chokhmato, and filled with his wisdom, ke'be'ein yafeh, with a sense of generosity. Kasher diber Hashem, just as Hashem had spoken, af le'inyan ha'od natan mehudo alav. So that just as the Lord had spoken, is there to include what we're not saying specifically here, but was said before, right? So he gave to Joshua of his hod, his glory, etc. Okay. We get on to now a whole new and major section, from which we read throughout the year. And this is the korbanot. This has to do with the statutory offerings. We've read extensively about circumstantial offerings or personal offerings or free will offerings. For example, these had to do with individuals and individual circumstances very often. We talked about sin offering, etc. But here we're talking about statutory offerings. We're talking about offerings brought on behalf of the entire community, simply because God has commanded that they be brought. But Rashi is going to, based on what we read in the Sifrei, explain the connection between what we're going to read in a second and what we have been reading up to this point. And that is this transition that Moses is seeking, right? Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe lemor. So the Lord spoke, Hashem spoke to Moses, saying, here we go. Sav et bnei Israel, command the children of Israel, va'amarta alehem, and say to them, et korbani lachmi, my sacrifice of food, the ishai, for my fire offerings, reach nichoach, a pleasing odor, tishmeru, you shall guard. In other words, you shall make sure you do it, lahakrivli b'moado, in order to offer them up to me at their appropriate times, at their appointed times. So we are now talking about offerings that are brought on the basis of time and calendar. And the Rashi, Savet b'nei Israel, command the people, the children of Israel. Ma amur lamala. Well, if you look at what immediately precedes this, it says Yivkod Hashem. It says, let Hashem appoint, let him take note and take care of that. So Moses had asked God to take note and to make sure that the transition would be a smooth and safe one. Amar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the Holy One, blessed be He, responds to Moses and says, Ad she'ata mitzaveni al banai. Well, since you have commanded me, in a sense, right, regarding my children, tzaveh et banai alai. Command my children to take care of me. You commanded me to take care of my children. You command my children to take care of me. Mashal, and they give a parable. Levat melech shahaitain nifteret min halam, regarding a king's daughter, a princess, who was departing this world. V'haitam mafkedet ba'ala al baneha, and she commanded her husband regarding their children, etc. Rashi doesn't give the rest of this particular midrash. Kedeita b'sifrei, he says, as it's stated in the Sifrei. So let's see. So let me see if we can find it. If it's here. There's a little more here, but I'm not sure that it actually refers to what we're doing. I do have a copy of the Sifrei, and I will try and go back and take a look at it and see if I can mention it tomorrow. So just a little bit more. Okay. Korbani, my sacrifices. So what do we mean sacrifices? Zehadam, that is referring to the blood of the offering. Lachmi, my food, I guess, right? Elu imurin, this refers to the fats and the parts of the sacrifice that were placed on the altar. They're called emurim. V'chein hu omer, and how do we know this? Because it's stated in Leviticus chapter 3, v'hektiram ha-kohen, and the kohen shall cause them to smoke, ha-mizbecha, on the altar, and there it is, lechem isher, right? The food of my fire offering. The ishai, for my fire offerings, ha-nitanin le'ishay mizbachi, that is, these offerings are given for the fire on my altar. Tishmeru, you shall guard. Again, the Sifrei, Sheyu Kohanim v'Leviim v'Yisraelim. That is to say that because it's Tishmeru, you will all observe it, you will all guard it. That is that the Kohanim, the Leviim, and the Israelites, Omdim al Gabav, they should stand over and observe what's going on with the sacrifice. And Mikan Lamdu, and from this they inferred V'tiknu ma'amadot, and they set up the ma'amadot, and the ma'amadot is something that I will need to explain tomorrow. So God willing, I will go on with that tomorrow. Just finishing this up, Mamoador in its appointed time. Let's find the place for you. Here we go. B'chol yom, that is to say, every day, who Moed HaTamidim. He says that every day is the appointed time for the Tamid offering, for the perpetual offering. And we'll stop right here, and I will try to remember tomorrow to discuss the Moadot, and also see if I can give you the rest of that parable about the wife, about the princess. Okay, so let's put that up here. Okay, and I'm going to stop the share. Anyone want to say anything at this point before I turn off the recording? Okay.